उपनिषदुपदेक्ष्य मम वाचमिमां प्रसुप्तां सञ्जीवयत्यखिलशक्तिधरस्वधाम्ना अन्यांश्च हस्तचरणश्रवणत्वगादीन् प्राणान्नमो भगवते पुरुषाय तुभ्यं प्राणान्नमो भगवते पुरुषाय तुभ्यम्.
Now, before taking up sannyasa, Yajnavalkya has discussed everything about the truth in Brihadaranyaka through Maitri, Yajnavalkya Samvada, and there are so many others also. So, when such a person takes to sannyasa, it is the Vidvat sannyasa. It is not with the aim of attaining the knowledge that he is taking to sannyasa ashrama. Sannyasa becomes a natural outcome of his knowledge. So these two are, there are various other kinds of inferior sannyasas also, but these two are main divisions, that one, to attain knowledge we take it, the external life. Another, it automatically the external lifestyle changes because of the attainment of the knowledge. Now here naturally in fourth verse of third chapter he is saying that this external sannyasa, you cannot ensure that it will give you the ultimate attainment, and you cannot call it the ultimate. Na karmanam anarambhat naishkarmyam purusho asnute. Similarly, naishkarmya siddhi is a great siddhi. Naishkarmya siddhi, there is a book which people do not read at all, it is so difficult. It is written by Sureshwaracharya, who was in his earlier life, who was Mandana Mishra. So he was given to lot of yaga, yajna, etc. Shankaracharya defeated him in their argument. So today morning I was speaking, this was our country. They were so sincere that they will not argue just like that. Suppose two persons are arguing, Shankaracharya and Sureshwaracharya, Mandana Mishra. Mandana Mishra was the greatest Karmakandi. Karmakandi means in the Vedas, ritualistic part of the Vedas. They were given to yaga, yajna, heaven, hell, all those things. And Shankaracharya was the greatest person those days in the Upanishadic part, the Jnana Kanda of the Vedas. Jnana Kanda means the knowledge part of the Vedas, the Upanishadic part. So Shankaracharya's mission in life was to re-establish the Upanishadic knowledge in the country. At that time, it was a depression in our country when the Upanishadic, the knowledge part was, it happens, always the country's society is moving through ups and downs. Sometimes the knowledge will come up, sometimes it will go down. That is the natural cycle of nature. When Shankaracharya met Govindapada, Govindapada's guru Gaudapada was still living. And Govindapada says that all these are lying. You have come, because seeing Shankaracharya he felt that here is somebody whom I can trust, I can give all that I have. He will go around and establish this knowledge everywhere. So he was very happy finding Shankaracharya. He said that you have come. All these are getting extinguished. You are somebody who can establish this. And he gave all that he knew. And that is what Shankaracharya did throughout his life. So he went to defeat the people. Those days, this was the process. It was through argument people used to defeat, not by calling strikes and destroying property or even government putting emergency, not like that. If there is a doubt about anything, there will be an argument. Maybe sometimes between two, sometimes many. Many Pandits will be there. They will argue. And there will be some judge also who will decide. Now, in this argument, the sincerity of the person was very important. Shankaracharya was arguing for knowledge, saying that Karma Kanda, the ritualistic part of the Vedas, are only inferior part. If you remain there, it is not the whole. They are only helping you to undergo certain disciplines so that you take to the Jnana Kanda after that. And Jnana Kanda is the Upanishadic part of the Vedas, that is the real part. Whereas Mandana Mishra was defending that the Karma Kanda is the real thing. Now, in their argument, that sincerity was there that suppose Shankaracharya gets defeated, then he has to leave sannyasa, which represents knowledge, and take to household life like Mandana Mishra. Take to ritualistic life, yaga, yajna, and marriage is a part of it also. Wife has to be there with you in the yaga, yajna. Can you understand? As sannyasin, he has to leave his sannyasa if he gets defeated. Similarly, if Mandana Mishra gets defeated, then he has to take up sannyasa. The sincerity was so much that they will, if it happens, and they did. And the amazing, the strangest part of it is who was the judge? Mandana Mishra's wife. Ubhay Bharati was kept the judge for that. She was a Brahma Vidushi also. He was a knowledgeable person. So she remained as the judge. You understand, suppose her husband gets defeated, then what will be her fate? Sort of widow, because he will take up sannyas and go away. But they had the trust in Ubhay Bharati that she will not be partial in her judgment. Such was the sincerity and truthfulness of our people. You should understand the culture. And that is what happened. When Shankaracharya defeated Mandana Mishra, Mandana Mishra became Sureshwaracharya. He took up sannyasa and went with Shankaracharya, one of the four disciples, principal disciples. This sincerity as to Mandana Mishra's guru was, what is his name? Kumaril Bhatta. Mandana Mishra's guru was Kumaril Bhatta. This Kumaril Bhatta, at that time Buddhism was in its peak. And again, Buddhism defeated our Hinduism, whatever Upanishadic Vidya and other things, even the Vedic, Buddha was not given to Vedas. Buddha went from ashram to ashram, did not find satisfactory answer anywhere. Moreover, he found everywhere corruption, Bali was going on, animal sacrifices were going on. So he got fed up. Then finally he sat and he has his own siddhi by meditation. And he made the statement that whatever I say, if the Vedas follow that, I am fine. Otherwise, I don't worry about what the Vedas says. So he is not a traditional spiritual person in our country. He was a non-traditional person. So he defeated the karma kandis of the ritualistic people of that age. So Buddhism was at its peak. This Kumaril Bhatta wanted to defeat Buddhism and re-establish Vedic culture. Nobody could do it. It was not easy. So to know the inner truths, the essential things of Buddhism, he went to the greatest Buddhist guru of his time, became his disciple, and learned Buddhism in and out, so that he could defeat Buddhism. And he defeated. But after defeating Buddhism, he was so sincere that he said that I have done a great sin. What? Being a Shishya, I have deceived my Guru. Buddhist Guru he deceived because he did not tell him the real intention. I have deceived my Guru. And the only penance for that is to die in Tushagni. What is Tushagni? They make a pit and heap husk there. The husk will come up to the throat, neck. Neck deep, they remain in the husk, and the husk is set fire from the bottom. It's a slow fire which will be moving from the feet to upward. So you can understand the pain the difficulty, the slowly the heat will progress, it will go on burning from below like that. So when Shankaracharya wanted to defeat Kumaril Bhatta, because he was again a Karmakandi, ritualistic person, he came in search of Kumaril Bhatta so that he can defeat an argument. One is between Buddhism and ritualistic Veda. Another is between the Jnana Kanda of Veda and ritualistic part of Veda, knowledge part of Veda and ritualistic part of Veda. You are finding difficult all these points. I will explain later what can be done. Some Sanskrit words are there. So, when he finally arrived near Kumaril Bhatta was already in the Tushagni and it was coming up to the neck almost. So, he told Shankaracharya that I cannot argue now. So, my greatest disciple is Mandana Mishra. You go and defeat Mandana Mishra, then if you can defeat Mandana Mishra, accept that you have defeated me. Then Shankaracharya went to Mandana Mishra and defeated in the argument. See the sincerity of the people, that he deceived his guru. He was a great disciple, but he deceived his guru in the basic intention to defeat them. He learned their knowledge, and for that he underwent this penance. This was our sincerity. I was telling today morning that in the oldest, the ancient university of the world has not known any university before that, or Takshashila, which is in Pakistan now, West Pakistan now. And now there is only one Pakistan. Other has become Bangladesh. This Takshashila was the international university of that time. People from all over China and other places, they used to come for knowledge there. It's a very famous university. Later on Nalanda came. It was before Nalanda. So Takshashila had 4 gates. There were east, west, north, south. So any seekers or students wanting to come from south will enter from the southern gate, from north will enter through the northern gate, like that. They had 4 gates. And you know who were the Dwarapalas. Dwarapala means the gatekeepers. Gatekeepers. There were 4 gatekeepers. All the 4 gatekeepers were great erudite scholars. So anybody who can defeat the gatekeeper will be allowed to go in. So it's not with any other weapon that you are standing with weapon and you will be searched with the magnetic thing, whether you are carrying any bomb or anything like that. Nothing like that. The internal bomb they used to test. And if you have the real internal bomb, you are allowed in. It should explode there, a slow explosion inside. That to fire the bomb, fire the inner light. Do you get my point? That fire they used to state, the person who is getting into the university, he must be fit to get in. So the gatekeepers were such scholars. This was our country. When Bakhtiyar Khilji, I think, he burnt Nalanda, the library was set fire, it burned for 3 months. Their own people have written the chronicle, in the chronicle. He burnt alive 2,000 sannyasins and teachers, and 10,000 students were burnt alive, along with the books and the heritage of in the 9-floored Nalanda University Library. That was our university. It happened in 11th century when he burnt it. Not only Nalanda, he burnt another 3 universities in the eastern part of Bengal, Bikramashila University and others. 3 other universities were there. All were international universities. So, Naishkarmya is a state which people used to covet, that he will not be given to any more action. It's an actionless state. He is saying that, but not doing any action, you cannot attain Naishkarmya. See the difference in Bhagavad Gita, that how he is reinterpreting with the true meaning. That if you don't do anything and sit tight like somebody sitting in Samadhi, it is not the real Naishkarmya. The real Naishkarmya is when you come to know, discover that I cannot do anything, I have nothing to do. I am not the doer, I am not the enjoyer. That knowledge makes you Naishkarma. That is the Naishkarma Siddhi. So he said that na karmanam anarambhat Naishkarmyam purusho asnute. Not by doing anything, starting any work or doing any work, you cannot attain Naishkarmya. So naturally Naishkarmya is something different. The Naishkarmya is defined again in 18th chapter. Similarly, nacha sanyasanateva siddhim samadhigacchati. Similarly, just by taking the external sannyasa, you cannot attain the siddhi. So here he has spoken about sannyasa in 3rd chapter. He has spoken in the 6th chapter also, 1st and 2nd verse. 5th chapter also, 2nd and 3rd verse. All I cannot go through, but those who are interested can just note down. 5th chapter, 2nd and 3rd. 6th chapter, 1st and 2nd. In our ashram, when we take one shloka, we will go on for 1 week. So there we can afford to go into all the details. Here the TV people are sitting on my head. So I have to go on faster. 6.1 is also very important, I must mention. 6th chapter, 1st verse. 1st and 2nd. Anashritah karma phalam karyam karma karoti yaha sa sannyasi cha yogi cha na niragnir na chakriyah yam sannyasamiti prahuhu yogam tam viddhi pandava na hyasamnyasta sankalpo yogi bhavati kaschana. He says, anashritah karma phalam karyam karma karoti yaha. This, if I explain, part of 18th chapter will be explained automatically. Sa sannyasi cha yogi cha na niragdir na chakriyah. Niragnihi means in performing yaga, homa, etc., you have the fire sacrifice. So that Niragni means one who does not do any fire sacrifice. That is homa, yaga, yajna, who doesn't do. Normally, those days, people used to do. Now, these are not so valid for us because otherwise also we do not do. There is no question of sannyasa or a non-sannyasa. Nobody does the... Very few people sometimes do the... What is the yaga generally do in the house? Havan. Which the standard havan people do now? Which is the name of the havan? Agnihotra. No? So, he says that niragnihi means one who has left doing havan and yajna. He says he is not a yogi, he is not a sannyasin. Na cha akriyaha, one who does not do any action, he just sits either in samadhi or just like that. He has left all his work. By that also he doesn't become a yogi or a sannyasin. So all external kind of renunciation is ruled out here. Sa sannyasi cha yogi cha. Then who is that sannyasi and who is a yogi? Here he is equating the sannyasi and yogi. In 18th chapter he will equate sannyasi and tyagi. Actually finally he will say, although Arjuna asked, you tell me separately what is sannyasa and what is tyaga, but it will be known by the 18th chapter that whatever is sannyasa, that itself is tyaga, and it is neither external tyaga nor external sannyasa. And all are jnana only. He says, anashritah karma phalam karyam karma karoti yaha. Who does not take refuge in the result of the action and does whatever comes to be done. Such a person is called a sannyasi, called a yogi. Now here again a great misconception I have to resolve. Anashritah karma phalam. Whenever Bhagavad Gita says as phalatyaga or karma phalatyaga or anashritah karma phalam, we have to understand what is the result, what is the phala Bhagavad Gita is talking about. All over the world it is misunderstood, grossly misunderstood, foolishly misunderstood. Actually, it is referring, at that time it was referring to yaga, yajna, etc., where the karma phala is not apparent. You do the yaga now, and after the body falls, you will go to this heaven, that heaven. Phala is not a direct cause and effect. You cannot see the phala. Some cases, putra kameshti and all, you have sons and all. Those were there. The most of the yagas were the result will come after your body falls. So phala tyaga means you don't worry about that phala. You do the yaga, yajna, etc. But when we apply now, nobody is doing yaga, yajna for going to heaven. And otherwise also Bhagavad Gita is not speaking about only that kind of the yaga, yajna, phala. Here the result of the action cannot be renounced at all. Objective result of an action. Suppose you walk towards CIRD. Will you not reach every step you take? Will you not get to CIRD and finally you will reach CIRD? So is it not the result of your walking action? After coming to CIRD, can you abandon that action? No, I did not want to come to CIRD. I don't want to come to CIRD. Is there any meaning in that? Anything you hold, say you are bearing child for 9 months. Every month, is it not coming nearer to delivery? So the causal chain, the fetus is growing. So the ultimate result of pregnancy is the delivery of the child. Is it not? Phalatyaga means you should abandon the child. Even if you abandon, it is the phala is already there. The abandoning is another karma. That will have another phala. The child will die. How will you abandon the result of it? It's absolutely wrong. Objective, Bhagavad Gita has not spoken about the objective result at all. This phala is internal phala, that whenever we are doing something, why do you do it? Tell me. To become happy. You may say that I will get some money. With the money, what will you do? I will get food and shelter and all. I have to feed my family. Well, why are you wanting to feed my family? They will be happy. So what? If they are happy, I will be happy. Ultimate result of every karma, is it not that we are looking for happiness? Any doubt? You think anything you do, ultimately to become happy. Now the question is, has anybody become happy by doing anything or getting anything from the external world? Has anybody become permanently happy ever in this world? You may get a little happiness. The moment another desire comes in, you are again unhappy. So initially when the desire is fulfilled, for a moment, no desire is disturbing your mind, no anxiety is disturbing your mind, so you feel happy. Till another desire, another anxiety. Suppose you are looking for a golden bangle or something, and the day you got the golden bangle, you are very happy. So the desire is fulfilled, you are happy. Within one day the fear comes that if anybody snatches it, or you go for something else, the bangle is forgotten, then you look for something else. A building you want, the day you enter, you are very happy, you have a big function where you feed everybody and all. The next day the wife will say something, यहाँ लीक हो रहा है, वहाँ से पानी आ रहा है, यहाँ हवा नहीं होता है, कैसा किचन बना दिया है, ये चाहिए वो चाहिए, ये ठीक नहीं हुआ है, things are not all right. So then we are no more thinking about that. As long as the desire was there, it was keeping our mind disturbed, agitated. The moment the desire is fulfilled, the mind becomes peaceful, and that gives us the joy or the happiness until it again gets disturbed by something else. Either the fear of losing or the desire for getting something else. Initially the promotion you wanted. When you get the promotion, you are very happy. You may feed your colleagues also. From next day onward, कौन जानता था कि इतना वर्कलोड हो जाएगा. अभी तो हमारा फैमिली पूरा बर्बाद हो रहा है. सुबह से शाम तक हम घर नहीं जा पाते हैं, रात तक. I am not able to get back home. So much of workload. The boss is putting so much of pressure. Did you not know that the pressure will be there after promotion? You should have thought about it. So actually, it is not the fulfillment of the desire that makes us happy. It is the elimination of the desire which makes us happy. What we want, we think that the objective result will make us happy. The Bhagavad Gita never says that the objective result has to be abandoned. Our focus has to be fully on the objective result. Suppose you are making a factory to make camera. The factory should produce camera, and good camera which is marketable. For that you have to put your all thoughts and experience, everything there, so that you get the product properly done. Not only that, the product has to be marketed. There is no question of abandoning it at all. But if you had thought that after the result is produced, after the product, I will sell the product and then I will become the richest person in the world and then only I will become happy. All those things that happiness is not going to come like that. Then there will be other fears. Somebody else is competing. He has become the still richer than me and we are competing. So, anashrita karma phalam means we are not expecting any happiness from the work we are doing, but we are doing whatever to be done. Whatever comes on our way, we are doing it. We do it very well. Because what happens is that when the desire is eliminated, we understand that the happiness does not come from the external world. Happiness is our birthright. It is always there in our soul. The moment we leave the desire, we become happy. So with that happiness, we do everything. So will he not automatically become anashrita karma phalam? Such a person who has known that my happiness is not depending on anything from the external world. I am happy from within. The happiness is in my soul, in my Atma. I am happy doing this or not doing this. Now, such a person, when he does something, will he expect happiness from there? He will do whatever to be done. Sometimes he will be successful, sometimes he will not be successful also. So he will not be worried about his success. If he feels that it has to be done, he will try to do it. And it may become successful, it may not become successful also. But he will do it to his best. And because he is not worried about the success or failure, he will do it in his best mindset. The performantial excellence will be maximum there.